What is up, everybody? It is Kobaz back again with some gameplay footage with commentary. This time I'm going to try and shift the focus a little bit off of Hunter and more onto the dungeon itself, since Murozond's Rise is a dungeon that gives a lot of people trouble. So this week it is fortified and bolstering, which is why we're doing an invis skip straight to the maiden. Reason being, we want to have our hero as early in the dungeon as possible, but we also know that the maiden is very dangerous and we want to hero directly onto her and burn her down before she gets bolstered. So you'll see that when my cooldowns are up, I am automatically cleaving. That can't be helped, but once my Call of the Wild is gone, I'm not going to be refreshing my cleave. It's just going to be priority damage into the maiden, hopefully killing them all at the same time, so that the AoE from the maiden doesn't just instantly kill. Right here, I'm gonna die to this orb. Yep. Unfortunate. We had just tried this on a 26. We failed in the last, like, 2 minutes of the key, and so we're redoing it on a 25. On the 26, it seemed like the orb was always going at the player that was furthest out, which was our Warlock. But, yeah, the orb caught me by surprise here, because it apparently just targets a ranged player, not the player who is furthest away. It was just RNG that on the previous run, the orb constantly went on the person that was furthest away. So definitely learn from my mistake there. The orb will kill you. And then here I just have to wait for my camo cooldown in order to get back up there. But this does just showcase that a dungeon does not have to be done perfectly to time it. So if you're in a pug, don't leave the second something goes wrong. Obviously there are times where the key is just over. And if it's a consensus within the group that you're only in there for score, then obviously when the key's for sure dead, it's fine to leave. But don't take it upon yourself to end the run prematurely just because something goes very slightly wrong. You can see right there, the pull ended, it's just fine. And then we go straight into the timekeeper since we're not going to have cooldowns, and he's not especially dangerous. You can see that I am focus targeting one of the Maguses, and that is because they have a volley cast that needs to get interrupted, that one right there. And you can also see that with the cooldown on nameplate WeakAuras I have, I can see when that cast is going to be available, so I can be looking to stop it before it's even coming up. So I can see here that circle is going to need stopped, and I mouse over into him right there just to make sure that we don't wipe to the volley. Again, it is a fortified week, and the trash packs are dangerous. And here I just communicate with my group, not that they needed it. He kicked it before I even said anything, that a volley was coming up. I see a volley is about to be coming up on circle, and I kick it. And that's all you have to do in these packs is focus down the timekeeper, since he's got the most health. You don't want to be focusing the mages down when you can just kick them. They don't really do anything outside of that. And right there, I just use a trap to interrupt the cast because it does still go on cooldown after you trap it. Next of the three mini bosses, we'll call them, before the first boss will spawn is Spurlock. And the way this mob works is he is always going to dash to a ranged player. I do believe that this one is whoever's furthest out, but it could just be a ranged player. He dashes, he's in a sandstorm after the dash, and then he starts a cast and he pulls someone in. You have to make sure that you assign someone to always get that kick, and they just can only kick that. And in our group, it's going to be the Mistweaver. And so you can see every time he does a dash, the Mistweaver kicks, because if he does not, the person who gets pulled into him will die when they reach Spurlock. And then other than that, this is a pretty similar pull to the one with the previous mini boss. You're just making sure that you're kicking the mages on their volleys. The other stuff doesn't matter too much. And one last thing to note about Spurlock here is his dash is predictable. You can see that I'm tracking the cooldown in a couple of different places. I should only really have it in one place. But when he dashes, you can dodge it. If you don't dodge it, you take a decent chunk of damage. So the second he starts his cast, that's when the location of the dash is determined. And then as soon as that cast starts, you just move out of the way, because it does a lot of damage. And depending on what you're playing and how high the key is, it'll just straight kill you. It's good to build good habits. Again, watching the mages, I can see that this one's about to cast a volley, but the tank kicks it, totally fine. And then, since it is not a tyrannical week, this boss is pretty easy. there's not too much to him. So what we do is while the RP is going, we're pulling more. And I believe our strategy when we did this was to pull even more into the boss, just to get some extra percent while we have cooldowns going and we're cleaving. So this pack, again, super simple. Name of the game in this whole area is just don't let volley go off while still doing the mechanics of each of the mini bosses. Here you don't have a mini boss to worry about, so it's just do damage, kick the volleys. Super simple. And you can see that I'm not going to have my main cooldown going up into the boss. Reason being, on this boss, you want to time your cooldowns, assuming you don't hold them for too long, when you have the haste buff from when he is doing the Siphon Oathstone mechanic. And so right here, I'm wanting to use my cooldowns on cooldown, and then also have that line up with the haste you get from the Oathstone. So these are the vanguards that we're going to pull into the boss. We could have pulled this boss sooner. Wasn't too slow, but it's still worthwhile. A couple of things to look out for on this boss. First mechanic is the Spark of Tear, which just went out. It just puts 2 circles on 2 different players. One needs to get dispelled immediately, and then the other one just has to pop a defensive and sit with it out there. Do not be overlapping with other people, don't stack, because it does do pulsing damage within that circle. And then if that mechanic does overlap with the dividing strike that you need to soak, you can just get very barely in one portion of the circle, and then the rest of your group is going to have to shift offset, and you will not be overlapped with them. So you can still split the damage that the group is taking without essentially killing them. And this is the Siphon Oathstone that I'm talking about. What happens is the boss just starts channeling. These orbs spawn all around the room. And then every orb that you get, up to 5, gives you 10% haste. And this is what I'm saving my cooldowns for. And you can see me pop them right there. I already had 5 stacks, but I refresh right before that last orb goes in so that I have 5 stacks for even longer. One tip that will really help you out when you're doing this boss is, if you are the tank, move the boss towards the Oathstone before the cast starts. And that way you can be hitting the boss and damaging that shield for the entire time that you're picking up orbs. And then the melee players can also be hitting the boss and just getting orbs right before they reach the Oathstone. If you do that correctly, then tanks and healers should not have to get very many orbs. You want all of your DPS to get 5 before tanks and healers are getting any. And other than that, the fight pretty much just repeats. One other thing to note is he does have a cast that targets a DPS. It's just going to be a big frontal cone, and it leaves a patch of that golden stuff on the ground. So DPS, make sure that you're baiting this correctly. You don't want to be towards the middle of the room when that's about to go off, because you do need a lot of space. So here you can see the sparks are coming out. It should be the melee player getting dispelled instantly, but I think he dispelled himself, which still works out. You can see that we are offset to one side, and then the last player that still has that debuff is on the other side. So you can still get 5 people in the dividing strike while the Spark of Tear is out. And then you can see here the cast is about to go off, Infinite Annihilation. That's the one that you need to bait. So whenever that ability is about to be off cooldown, just make sure that you are towards the outside of the room so that he does not fill up the entire center of the room where you're going to have to be grabbing orbs with something that's going to hurt you when you walk over it. It's a really good way to make this fight a lot harder than it needs to be. Here on Fortified, we are focusing down the Infinite Watchkeeper. The reason being, this AoE absolutely trucks, even on just a 25. It is a lot of damage. If your healer does not have something for the group, you need to be making sure that you're popping something. Here's the Infinite Fury. You can see I use my 40% damage wall, and even through the 40% wall, it was a lot of damage. So next up, since I do want to keep damage going, I'm likely to use my Fortitude of the Bear for the next set, plus Exhilaration. Those 2 abilities synergize really well. Reason being, Fortitude of the Bear gives you extra HP. Exhilaration heals based off of your HP. And so it's really good to use that combo on damage like this, where it's not one big hit all at once, but instead it's a lot of, I wouldn't say smaller, but a lot of successive hits.
3,
and
2, 1.
You don't need to just have a big damage reduction to make sure you don't get one shot. It's best to just make sure that you have the most healing, essentially, over the duration, or effective HP gain over the duration. So it's good to be thinking ahead about your cooldown usage, especially as a hunter. If you use your abilities correctly, then we're pretty darn tanky, and if not, we die. This gauntlet is not that difficult if you go around the outside. Right here, I'm trying to go down the middle. I should not be. And here, I go down the outside, and it's much easier. Another thing is, it is easier if you get it done the first time. If you have half of your group go to the right, or I should say 2 people to the right, 2 people to the left, and 1 down the middle, then these frontal cones and the balls that get shot out are going to be spread all across the room. So if, let's say, your whole group makes it the first time and you don't, then every mob in that gauntlet is going to be targeting you, and you're better off just waiting to take the portal. But you should be able to get it done the first time, assuming you guys split up somewhat well, and then you go around the outside of the room, except for the one person that can go down the middle to bait more orbs, but you can just go like 3 right, 2 left. One last thing to note about that gauntlet is don't step on the mobs. If you get hit by any of the time sand during that gauntlet, it sends you back, and that includes the little puddles that are right under the mobs. And that was the first mistake I made when I failed it the first time on that gauntlet. Was I was trying to dodge the orbs and I clipped one of the mobs, and that sent me back. So here it's just 2 dragons. One just spawns swirlies and does a frontal. Not dangerous at all. And so you want to focus the other one, which we already killed there. That one has an AoE that's very similar to the dragon we did just before the gauntlet. So again, you want to make sure that you have cooldowns up. We have heroism come up for that mob. And that's another reason that we did the stealth skip in the first place, just to get to Maiden and use hero as soon as possible, is so that this hero on fortified times up with that mob because it is dangerous. And very often you won't have as many defensive cooldowns since you just had to use them right before the gauntlet on the other dragon. So this section of the dungeon is a big pain. Every time something dies, or any of the little fusions die, they will clear sand near where they die. You also have to kill a certain number of rift mages in order to essentially connect Chromie to the different portals before you can move on in the dungeon. It's really important during this stretch that you try to stay in combat with a rift mage for the whole time. And I do believe that we mess up on that front, and you'll be able to see the fallout when it comes to how much time we end up wasting because of that. And so here you can see we're clearing off towards the left because we're going to hook up to the portal off to the left, and then we backtrack, hook up to the portal on the right, and then once those are completely done, then you can continue on in the dungeon. So here we're just slowly clearing, making sure that we're killing mobs near the sand. Every time they burst, when they die, you can see it on the screen there. They clear some sand. The mobs in this area, at least for DPS, aren't especially dangerous. There are a couple of tank mechanics, and then there's also a debuff that gets put out by the big dragon-looking guys. That one just needs to get dispelled. One goes on the tank, one goes on a player, and it hurts. If you can get it off of yourself, I recommend doing that. But if not, it's just a normal dispel. And then just try to get kicks on the rift mages, especially on the cast that's about to come up here, the infinite burn. Make sure you get that kick and you're good to go. So here we are, we're clearing towards that final portal over here. I am asking the tank right here if we have to kill that rift mage, because when we tried this on the 26 that I mentioned earlier that we failed in like the final stretch of the dungeon, we were a little bit short on percent coming out of this area, and we had killed that rift mage, and the consensus was we didn't have to kill the rift mage because we already made it to that portal and we would be fine. But I do think that comes back to bite us a little bit here, because we're short on percent and we end up pulling these fusions in, just slowly trying to get up to 80%, which is the threshold that you want to hit here before moving on to the rest of the dungeon. If you're gonna have a similar pull count as us, or I should say a similar route. And right here we're only at 75.82% with this rift mage. We're like, okay, that's not going to do it. Let's pull in some fusions. And I believe that ends up still being short, and so we end up wasting a decent chunk of time here because we tried to skip the rift mage and it didn't quite work out, or the last rift mage I should say. And yeah, right here we did the math, and the tank is looking for more to pull because he's like, okay, we're not gonna have enough percent, so we pull more fusions. And this ends up being a really, really big time waste on this dungeon. But, you know, that's one of those things is as you go, make sure that you're learning, and cumulatively, as you do these dungeons more and more, you're going to learn hopefully at least something from each run, and then you just implement a fix for the next run, and maybe you identify a new problem in the following run, and you just learn, improve, even if you're only, you know, getting 5% better each time. You know, do that dungeon 4 times, and it's massive improvements. And obviously, realistically, it wouldn't actually be, you know, getting 5% better each time. It would be like 10% better, and then 5% better, and then 2% better, and then 1% better. And the returns definitely start to diminish, but it doesn't mean that they are not impactful. And there you can see we finally get 80%. We overpull just a teeny bit, but the overpulling didn't matter. It was just getting to that 80% so that we can keep on going here. There are a couple of different routes that you can take when you're doing this dungeon. Since we're doing it on fortified and we don't have heroism up, we go straight to Morchie next. Reason being, we want to have hero on the destroyer before the time lost battlefield encounter, or I guess that's part of the encounter, but we want to use lust on that one. This mob you can skip. You can see that I skip by just to get the RP going while my group is on the side there waiting for the mob to pat. If the mob is on that far side, the close side I should say, you can just walk right by the outside and it will not aggro. So you can see right here, they're walking right by as it's channeling into one of those sand portals, and we can skip that mob altogether. There's no reason to do it, and Morchie is active pretty much right as they get here. So really good skip on that part. When you're doing Morchie, do not pop cooldowns that are sizable on pull. So you can see I use Bestial Wrath, but it's because it's a very, very short cooldown. But your 2 minutes or anything like that, you want to wait until after she does this little this mechanic here. Otherwise, you're going to lose a lot of uptime. That mechanic is pretty simple. She splits herself into images all around the room, and they're going to have different types of hats on. The one without a hat is the real Morchie, and what needs to happen is you need to get next to the real Morchie before the mechanic finishes, because it blasts the rest of the room. And something that I find helps me personally is I turn nameplates off when that mechanic is happening, so that you can more clearly see Morchie's head all around the room, and you can identify which one is the real one. The other mechanic that you have to worry about on this boss is when she spawns these things that fixate. And you can see right here, we identify Moon as the one without the hat. You get right next to her, and then you'll see the big blast in the rest of the room. Blast right there, big frontal. So these ads that get spawned, they fixate on you, and they just run towards you. You can keep it CC'd permanently. If they reach you, they do a lot of damage. They'll start hitting you. And if they walk over any of those time sand circles, they explode and put a debuff on the whole group. If multiple of those hit at the same time, you can see here we get the dot for 6 seconds. The dot does stack. So if multiple of those go into sand at the same time, it is not good. You have to pop a defensive, which did happen earlier. Right there, I trapped mine, but then it got cleaved and broken. So I just used Turtle to avoid the hits here. I'm waiting for the dot to fall off, which is happening in 2 seconds. Right there, it falls off, and then I'm just going to kite it into sand so I don't have to worry about it. If you do kite your mob, your fixate duplicate into sand, it will respawn where it was previously on the next set. And right here, you can see it can be a little bit close. You want to save move speed to get to the correct Morchie, because if you're on the opposite side of the room, it is kind of tight to actually get into a safe spot. But as I was saying, those fixates, you can see that they don't disappear. They just wait to get reactivated. They get reactivated in the same spot, and I can trap mine because I know exactly where it's going to come from. And then you can just keep it CC'd perma. A lot of groups will just have one person with an AoE CC take care of it. So if you have like a druid with mass entangle or a vengeance demon hunter, something like that, the strategy is to actually group up as 5 right as those are about to spawn, so that all of the fixate mobs are in the same spot, and then you just group CC them and just keep them CC'd. So if you have a vengeance demon hunter, they'll sigil them, and then you'll follow that sigil up with like an AoE in cap or something, and then You just chain stun them until Sigil is back up, or, you know, mass roots, something like that. You just keep them CC'd the whole time, and it's a non-mechanic. But you do need to be very aware if they break and they're all going to hit a sand puddle at the same time when you do that strat, because 5 of those hitting, like, you need to use an immunity or a big DR, otherwise you just die. So there are pros and cons to both, and obviously it's group dependent. If you have the AoE CC, I say go for it, but just make sure that you are not breaking it, and you are watching to make sure that they don't get out and are uncontrolled and all hitting a sand puddle at the same time, because that's an easy way to wipe. Here, because of our routing, we want to skip everything before this boss. And you can see hero is coming up in 5 seconds, so it's timed just about perfectly, because we do want to use hero on this this destroyer here. Since a couple of us were faster than the rest of the group, we put a summon stone down just in case the pat is bad and we start summoning. But as you can see, there's another clearing right after, and the rest of our group can catch up. We don't want to pull any of those. We had to on the 26 because we had the count wrong, but ideally you're just skipping all of this and going from boss to boss to boss. This Horde Destroyer is dangerous. There are 2 different mechanics. One is the volatile mortar here. When you get this, I recommend just sprinting, just running in one direction and keep on sprinting. And ideally the Warlock would have moved in the other direction. The way that mortar works is it targets one person, and then it shoots these lines that are going to be like crisscrossing on either side of them. And so if you're near other players, like right here, you can see that those things come out really quickly, but they don't actually target the player. They're going to be on either side of the player. And so the main thing about this is you just cannot be near other people, because they spawn so quickly that if you're near other people, you're not in danger as the target, but those circles that spawn on either side of you will kill someone before they can dodge them. And then the only other mechanic here that you have to watch out for is the Goblin Sappers. If you have Binding Shot, you can actually just pop it right on the tail end of the tank as they're shooting out, because they come out of the back of the tank. The Destroyer, not, you know, the prot pally, but they shoot out of the back of the Destroyer, so you can just pop that binding, and then as they shoot out, they get CC'd immediately, and then those you just have to cleave down. And the next set of mobs that are part of this encounter are these Raiders. As long as you make sure you're getting kicks on the Rallying Cries, these aren't too dangerous outside of their Earthquake cast. When possible, you need to just be constantly moving. You can see that each Earthquake tick is like 40% of my health here, which is dangerous. Like if you're casting and you get hit by 2 of those, depending on the key level and your gear, you're just dead. So as a BM hunter, at least, I'm just constantly moving, so I don't have to worry about the Earthquake cast. But if you're a marksmanship hunter, a warlock, something that actually needs to sit still and cast, just be very aware of when that spell is going to come out so that you can move immediately, because it's a lot of damage. And you can see right there. We focus down the 2 Raiders first, and then once those are dead, the Farseer will start to try to heal. You can see Earthquake's about to come out right there. Constantly move. The Farseer is the one that casts the Earthquake, so if you're not sure which mob to look at, the Earthquake comes out right at the end of that Earthquake cast. Once the other mobs are dead, the Farseer will try to heal. Just kick it. Throughout this whole thing, it's good to be cleaving, because all of these mobs that are around us here fighting each other, the Horde and Alliance, they are actual mobs. They don't have nameplates showing up here, but they are active. You can hit them. So between packs, you can be hitting them, and you can use them to keep your barb shot stacks up, things like that. But the neat thing about this is they have a set amount of HP as they're out here, and if you cleave them before you start this encounter, they can actually be already damaged. So you can see the axe thrower there. When it became active, it was not full HP. Reason being, we had been cleaving it before Call for Help or Call for the Horde cast went off, and so we had actually like pre-damaged it before it was active and doing its mechanics. The other thing to look out for on this boss is the shockwave. You need to be baiting towards the outside of the room, sort of like the mechanic that we did on Tyr, the big frontal cone. This one doesn't leave anything on the ground, but if he does hit ally troops that are towards the center of the room there, he gets stacking damage, and you don't need to take more damage on this boss. Another mechanic to look out for is the Blade Storm there. He just fixates one player. He will start to spin towards them. You just kite. Follow the Horde is going to have 3 adds become active. The Warlock you just kick, it'll group up, it'll die, no worries. The Axe Thrower is the one that is dangerous. It has a serrated axe cast, and it puts a big dot on whoever it hits. So make sure we're using stuns, something similar to stop that. Let's see if we can identify the cast here. So you can see the Axe Thrower is active towards the center of the screen there. We hodged it a little prematurely. It hasn't, there it is. There's the cast right there that you want to stop, and we ROP it before it goes out. It's the serrated axe cast. When it hits someone, it puts a big dot, and if you do get hit by it, make sure you use a defensive. Other than that, this fight just repeats. It's pretty simple. As long as you bait the shockwaves well, the boss won't do ramping damage throughout the fight. But if that shockwave goes through the center of the room a couple of times, it's going to be doing like 10-20% more damage throughout the entire encounter, and that makes it a lot harder. So here, just like on the way in, we just want to avoid these mobs. You just wait until they path by, and you walk. Super simple. And we are only going to have one more trash pack before the dungeon is over, and it should work out such that we get hero on the last boss during that final burn when there's a lot of AoE damage going on, and you don't want to be in that phase for all that long. This last trash pack is dangerous, especially on fortified, and even more so on bolstering. That is the only reason that we failed the 26 right before this. Is what happened was we weren't sure whether we should be focusing the main dragon that does AoE damage, or we should kill off the little guys who also do AoE damage but less, and then risk bolstering the dragon. And before doing the 26, we hadn't done the math, we hadn't really figured it out. I do think it's best to just focus down the middle dragon, and you're gonna see as we do it here, depending on how quick you are in the dungeon, you can hero this on fortified and especially bolstering. It is a dangerous trash pack, but with our route, we are not gonna have hero here, so we're just making sure that we have cooldowns. And that's another reason that we do this route, is when we go from boss to boss like that without any trash in between, you're gonna have cooldowns up at the start of every boss, which is really useful. So here you can see infinite fury from that main dragon, which is a lot of damage taken, but then the 2 marauders on the side also do AoE damage. And so it honestly, there's no way to describe it other than just a lot of damage constantly going out. So make sure that you're getting kicks on the marauders as you focus the main dragon down. If the kicks go off, it's already going to be close. If the casts go off, someone is dying. If it's overlapping with the AoE that goes out here. So like this cast going off right here, it just barely gets kicked at the end there. If that cast goes off during that AoE, someone's dead. But other than that, you just focus the main mob, make sure that you're dodging the ground effects, and make sure that you are rotating defensives for each of the big infinite furies that come out of the dragon here. And there, we killed it pretty clean. It was not that clean, sadly, on the 26 that we tried just moments before we pulled this dungeon. But again, as a hunter, ideally you're saving turtle and you're rotating through like Fortitude of the Bear, Exil, Health Pot, Lockstone, and your wall. Reason being, you can't do damage while you're in turtle. If you know that you're going to have to turtle, I recommend getting like your Beast Cleave refreshed and your Barb Shots refreshed right before pressing turtle. You should not have to turtle reactively. You should have it planned out, and you should know that you're about to have to turtle, so you can set up for it and you're losing as little damage as possible while you're sitting in the turtle. But that is the reason that I like to save turtle, is that if something goes wrong, it is also your strongest defensive. So like, let's say our healer gets hit by a ground effect there and he dies. Well, in the time that he respawns, if I, let's say, had sent turtle on the first one when the healer was alive and it was overkill as far as safety goes, then I'm going to die on that one if something goes wrong. Whereas if I just use a wall while my healer's up, then I can save the turtle for when something does potentially go wrong. On this boss, in this first section, I recommend focusing the adds. The adds do a lot of damage. You can see I didn't pop my cooldowns on pull. I wanted to wait until this first add was up, and that way I'm cleaving, I'm still focusing the keeper, but I'm still doing boss damage. Other than that, as far as this part of the dungeon goes, the only thing that you really have to be watching for is the orbs. And the way those orbs work is they spawn on 2 players. It will always prioritize ranged. So if you have 2 ranged, it'll always go on the ranged. And so as long as you're standing in that sand puddle below the orb, it falls slowly. Once you get out, it falls more quickly. When it hits the ground, it does a lot of damage to the group. So if both people step out immediately, or both people stay in the whole time, those orbs are going to hit at the same time. If they hit at the same time, you're dead. So right here, you're about to see, I pop a defensive. Oh, nope. We just sunrises actually. So the Warlock was doing an entangling. He stepped out. It was already predetermined that I'm supposed to be the one stepping out because BM Hunters don't lose damage for moving. But it was just a mistake and we died for it right there. I should have seen that coming and just used my turtle when I saw that that was about to happen. That's just a misplay, but again, you learn going forward. And in this group at least, like we have a prot paladin and a mistweaver monk. And so when entangling goes out like that, what we should have done is just freedom the warlock to get rid of the entangling so he can stay in the orb spawn, not have to worry about it, right? Which is something that we had talked about before the dungeon, but mistakes happen and it's totally fine. It didn't cost us the key or anything. But especially, oh yeah, so right here I can see that the orbs are gonna hit back to back, and since we just learned from the previous mistake, we know to press that big defensive here. The reason that one happened is because for some reason one of the orbs spawned in melee and the warlock stayed in his. The melee didn't notice the orb was on them, and so it wasn't offset by enough. And it could have been that I was just too close to melee, and so my orb spawned where someone else was. That could also be it. And then for the end of this fight, you're still doing the orbs. You're not having to deal with ad casts, but you are having to deal with this AoE. And the way that works is every time the AoE comes up, the whole group is taking damage, and then you're also leaving stuff behind on the ground. You can see all those sand puddles behind us. Right there, I was stacked with the Warlock. I made sure to get off of the Warlock before the orb spawned, because if those are double stacked, there's no counterplay. Like, they're going to go off at the same time. I very almost screwed us over there. But as I was saying, when this AoE is going out, you're leaving puddles behind, and you need to make sure that you are leaving enough room. So right there, I thought the boss was just going to die, and so I'm not being especially conscious or conscientious of where we're putting the puddles, because I'm like, okay, the boss is going to die before the next one, right? Well, the boss did not die before the next one, and it ended up biting us a little bit here. Like right here, the next set is going to be really hard, because this boss, it only had 5-10% HP left, but it's taking a while. So just make sure that until the boss is actually dead, you're doing the mechanic correctly. If you look behind us here, if I turn it all, we'll see there was a ton of space that I could have been filling in, and you need to be doing that as a ranged player. Just filling in, like backfilling the space to make sure that we have as much space ahead of us where we need to be moving in the future as possible. So that's it for the dungeon. It is one of the more difficult dungeons this season. I think it's kind of crazy how much harder Rise is than Fall. Fall still does have some issues as far as difficulty curves go. And it's just insane how much harder Rise is than, say, Blackrock Hold or Atal Desar. Very difficult key, but as long as you know going into it what to be looking out for, what to pre-plan defensives for, strategies as far as what you should skip, what you shouldn't skip, it's a very doable key, I should say. So hopefully with the insight I gave during this dungeon, your next run will be at least a little bit smoother. But like I said, gradual and incremental improvements are what you should be looking for when you're doing Mythic Plus. Not every key is going to be for score, but every key is going to be, or should be, a learning experience. So just because a key, especially early in the season here, isn't going to be timed, doesn't mean that you just need to leave immediately. Because if you know, if the key is dead on, let's say, the second boss or halfway through the dungeon, if you leave immediately, then you are missing out on half of the learning experiences that you could potentially get during that dungeon. So don't abandon your pug groups and just go into keys knowing that not every key is going to be for score, but every key is and should be a learning experience so that you can get score in the future. And I guess just one final note on that. Don't avoid keys. Like if you've already done a 25 rise and you don't need another 25 rise, don't tell your group that you're not going to do more 25 rises if someone else in the group needs it for score. Because one, it's just selfish gameplay, right? You're going as a group. You should be looking to improve as a group together, especially if they're players that you frequently play with. And for two, just because you don't need it for score now doesn't mean that doing it now and learning from it won't result in more score later, because you learned from this 25, and then when that 27 pops up, you have more practice and you can actually complete it in the future. So hopefully this was helpful. Thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate you guys, and I will see you on the next one.